Okay. We've got it. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. And as we begin our program tonight, I want to take a moment to thank Charlene Elian and her family for sponsoring this program tonight in memory of Pierre. And I am personally honored that the family has chosen to support two of the lectures celebrating my 40th anniversary at Anshe. So Charlene, to you and your family, thank you. Toda Rabbi. I'm very, very grateful to you. Our special guest tonight is Rabbi Dr. Bradley Shavit Artson. He holds the Abner and Rosalind Goldstein Dean's Chair of the Siegel School of Rabbinic Studies and is Vice President of American Jewish University. Rabbi Artson has long been a passionate advocate for social justice, human dignity, diversity, and inclusion. He wrote a book on Jewish teachings on war, peace, and nuclear annihilation in the late 80s, light reading, became a leading voice advocating for LGBTQ plus marriage and ordination in the 90s, and has published and spoken widely on environmental ethics, special needs, inclusion, racial and economic justice, cultural and religious dialogue and cooperation, and working for a just and secure peace for Israel and the Middle East. Brad is a member of the philosophy department. He's particularly interested in theology, ethics, and the integration of science and religion. He mentors Camp Ramah in California and Ojai and Ramah of Northern California in the Bay Area. He's also dean of the Zachariah Frankel College in Potsdam, Germany, ordaining conservative rabbis for Europe. Rabbi Artson is a frequent contributor for the Huffington Post, for the Times of Israel. He's the author of 12 books and over 250 articles, most recently Renewing the Process of Creation, a Jewish Integration of Science and Spirit. Welcome, Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson. Really honored.
Lovely to be with you. Thanks for having me here.
So, as part of this 40th anniversary, I've been thinking a lot about leadership. And so when we were thinking about people to talk with, your name came up right away. Because we're old friends, we've known each other for many, many years, decades. And I am a huge fan of you and your work and student of your writing. And as dean of a major rabbinical school, you are really on the front lines of a very, very serious discussion on Jewish leadership today. So let's begin by talking about Anshe, because that's what everybody wants to talk about. And we are just completing a rabbinic search. And hopefully we'll be announcing a new rabbi in the next day or so. But we saw firsthand, and this is actually my 11th go-round at hiring rabbis for the congregation. And we got to see the rabbinic pipeline dilemma up close and personal. And we went through the search process and we received a number of applicants, but the number of applicants that we received this year was a lot less than the years previous. And I think that that's reflective of the shrinking number in rabbinical schools and the shrinking number of rabbis who are interested in going into the pulpit in general. And as we look at the diminished number of students in rabbinical schools entering students this coming year, we think the problem will only become more acute. So how do you understand this pipeline problem? How much of it is due to COVID? And is there a way for us to make the pulpit more attractive?
Those are lots of great questions. I want to give you some statistics to help make that solid in everyone's mind. Here's a reality that the 5 largest non-Orthodox rabbinical schools in the year 2008 had between them an entering class of slightly over 100 students. Last year, those same 5 schools had an entering class between them of 50. If you had extended further back, you'd have seen that number was going down even before then. So it's not because of COVID, it's something bigger than COVID. But for some reason, and probably not just one reason, many reasons, young people who would have gone into the rabbinate are not. I think there are many things at work here. There's no way to do a scientific study, but let me throw out some possibilities, Rabbi Siegel, of what I think feeds into this. Number one is demographic. So we had the baby boom, then we had the kids of the baby boom. We're in this trough right here. We haven't yet had the population go up again. So graduate schools around the country are experiencing a shrinking of numbers. 2, the humanities are dying. So the number of people who are getting master's degree or PhDs in English literature, French literature, Scandinavian civilization, history is plummeting. And religion is a humanities. At the end of the day, we study literature, we study people, we study history. So the decline of the humanities is a decline of religion. The largest number of Jews in the history of this country polling say that they're Jewish but not religious, meaning not practicing any religion. That's unprecedented. About 1/3 of the Jews polled in the last poll said that. So you have all of these issues flying around, and then you have a couple more. There's a way in which the next generation isn't willing to make the personal sacrifices that, Michael, your and my generation did. And your and my generation weren't willing to make the sacrifices that the rabbis of a generation before us had done. So there is a way in which I routinely tell people what a congregational rabbi's week looks like, and I can see the horror on their faces, and they're saying, well, I'm not going to do that, right? So how do we, and then there's other things that play into it. Let me give you one that you probably haven't thought to put in this bucket. Young people who would have thought about the conservative rabbinate, many of them make aliyah instead. So there are people doing tech work in Tel Aviv who would have become conservative rabbis a generation ago, but they can follow their Jewish passion by moving to Israel rather than making a career choice. And I know several young teenagers who I thought were kind of on their way to rabbinical school who are now living in various places in Israel, having a secular job and a rich Jewish life outside of their job. I think that the changing roles of gender and orientation have shifted things up. The rabbis of a generation before me were all male, and they all had female spouses who kind of ran everything except for the work. That doesn't happen anymore. Regardless of gender and orientation, that doesn't happen anymore. So these things you can think of as good or bad, but they are a reality. And so the challenge that I think we're left with is twofold. On the pipeline side, I ask myself, what can we do as a rabbinical school to lower the barriers, some of which we know about, some of which are invisible, without compromising the quality? In other words, we want to put out rabbis who are still knowledgeable in texts in the original, still know the tradition, know history, good thinkers, careful pastors, loving, compassionate people. But we're putting things in their way that are making them not willing to follow this path. So we need to visit that, and that's not unique to us. I know that JTS is thinking about that. All of the rabbinical programs are giving serious thought to what can we do to open up the pipeline and protect quality at the same time. And then honestly, I love the fact that you raised it because it's an important thing. The one institution that hasn't revisited practice and expectation is the synagogue, right? So this is a good opportunity for Anshe Emet to be a leader again, as you have so many times in the past. You have a new rabbi coming in, I hope. And what are you going to do to nurture that resource? Meaning, how do you make sure that that young person 10 years from now still loves being a rabbi, loves their work, feels like they have a rich and rewarding life, and not that they're so burned out and resentful and they're just getting hit every time they turn around? And that's work that the synagogues need to do, because the old expectation of the rabbi who is available around the clock and willing to make every sacrifice at the drop of any congregant's hat, that's not going to work. And that will drive people away.
I think one of the things that we've done well at Anshe Emet is focus on mentoring. We have a pretty good track record of rabbis who come out of Anshe Emet. And part of mentoring is playing to rabbi strengths, taking their pulse fairly regularly, see how they're doing, knowing that there are other rabbis and other clergy who support, building within the congregation a group of people who can also help with Shiva minyas and things like that. So everything doesn't only fall on the rabbi's shoulder. But the other thing that I think has made Anshe Emet attractive is that we are always trying to develop the skill sets in young rabbis, to develop them, changing their job description, challenging them, taking them out of their comfort zone, but making sure there's a safety net there too. So those are, I think we have done some of those things, but I do want to say, I think you've touched on this very well, that it is a very challenging time.
It is, and you won't say it, so I'm going to say it. Part of what makes Anshe Emet so wonderful is you. And I know that not just because we're friends, but I've also trained some of the rabbis who have served at Anshe Emet. And in addition to their talent and character, they all speak about the opportunity to be mentored by you as a real highlight. And I will tell your congregants, that's not always true of every major congregation. There are many senior rabbis who expect the assistant to take stuff off of their plate and don't put in the time doing the mentoring. And Rabbi Siegel has done that not only with rabbis who work at Anshe Emet, but I know rabbis who come to Chicago and count him as one of their mentors. And there are several of them who are now shining lights, not only locally, but across the country, who benefited from Michael's generosity and skill. And that is crucial, I think. That's not something that we need to do better, and we can frankly learn from the Chabad model. Everybody needs a Rebbe. Everybody needs someone who can see them in their greatness and help them shine. And you do that.
Well, thank you so much. That coming from you, that means the world. I take that as a great compliment. So thank you, Brad. So let's talk about, we've talked about the larger view, but let's talk a little bit about what are some of the new features of the Ziegler rabbinical model that you are unveiling?
So let me share with everybody the numbers have been declining at our rabbinical school as at others. And we realized that the real challenge is, how do you take a challenge and turn it into an opportunity? If the current system isn't working, that's a chance to get rid of what's broken. And so we brought in a panel of 12 different people from all across North America, men, women, gay, straight, rabbis, not rabbis, part of the conservative movement, part of other movements, unaffiliated with denominations, but people, all of whom have been thinking about the future of Jewish life and who have been thinking about the role of rabbis in that life. And we brought them to Los Angeles for 2 days of intense conversation. And what we said at that opening dinner was, there's nothing you can't suggest, nothing you can't criticize anything. and let's think together. And we had the most amazing conversations. At the end of those 2 days, I took all of those suggestions and I wrote them up as a series of proposals. And then we spent a year talking to all of our stakeholders. We worked through our faculty, we talked to current students, we talked to alumni, we talked to donors, we talked to colleagues in the Rabbinical Assembly. We had lots of conversations, and I'm very pleased that we came out with a very distinctive and new program. And so I want to say something before I tell you what's in that program, because I think it does shine a light. I want to say it's not the only way to solve the problem. Other rabbinical schools will come up with different kinds of solutions. And they'll look at some of what we do and will say, we'll never do that. And that's good, right? There needs to be multiple approaches to attract different people with different life circumstances and different temperaments. So I am not saying we've solved the problem in the only way that it can be solved. I'm saying that we did something bold. So here's what we did. First thing we did is we came up with what we call tuition transparency. Instead of telling people we charge $34,000 a year of tuition and then trying to throw enough grants and loans to them that they stop hyperventilating for a moment, we just looked at the actual expenses and we said, we're going to charge you $7,000 for tuition. And I'll turn to my donors to make up the difference. So $7,000 transparent tuition, that's what it costs. We also realized that we are the longest master's program in the world. Nobody has a 6-year master's program, but rabbinical students routinely go to school for 5, 6, even 7 years, and they come out with ordination and a master's degree. Our accrediting body keeps saying, are you people crazy? Nobody does that. Yeah. So we decided we needed to shave time off the program. And so we said, all right, we're going to limit ourselves to a 5-year program. And then we learned something from medical schools. The final year of the program will be a residency. So let's imagine that it could be a residency in a synagogue, a school, chaplaincy, or something entrepreneurial. Let's imagine that a young Chicagoan wants to come to a new kind of pioneering rabbinical approach, and they look at Siegel and they decide that's for us, but I know I want to live in Chicago when it's all over. We'll work with Chicago institutions. Most likely you guys will be the first that we'll call, and we'll say, hey, we've got someone who's going to be a resident, needs a residency. That means they're going to work somewhere half-time. They need a salary for that. But I'll give you someone who is a year short of being ordained, and you can train them. And the great thing about the residency is if it doesn't work out at the end of the year, you give them a little party, you say it's been wonderful, off they go. But if it did work out, you can then say to them, you don't have to move. Let's find a way to make this permanent.
Yeah, this is something that I've always envied rabbis on either coast, because they could always have rabbinic interns.
Yep.
You know, I was talking to Elliot Cosgrove on the East Coast, or Sharon Browse on the West Coast, when they have little armies.
That's right.
Of interns, which is wonderful for them.
Correct.
And I can only imagine how beneficial that would be to Anshe Emet.
It would be wonderful. And frankly, having someone learn the actual what do you do as a rabbi from Anshe Emet would be good for the rabbinate. So it's good in both directions. Everyone who's been to a professional school knows you learn the basics once while you're in school, but then you really learn it by doing it. My wife is an attorney. She learned how to be an attorney not at Columbia Law School. She learned how to do that when they threw her into the court. So that's one big change. Second,
I think every rabbi knows that feeling when they get a new job and they sit at their desk, especially when they're right out of rabbinical school. I remember this feeling, sitting at the desk and saying, okay, what do I do now?
That's right. Look,
and I've been learning for 40 years now, so yeah.
Correct. When I first started, I took a pulpit in South Orange County, which is about halfway between LA and San Diego. And my classmate, Rabbi Eli Spitz, took a pulpit 20 minutes north of me. And we would call each other twice a day. Oh my God, what do I do now? How do I handle this? What do you like? And we helped get each other through. But imagine if instead of having that last year on the campus,
Yeah.
that last year was at Anshe Emet, or someone applies who wants to go back to Toronto or wants to be in New Orleans or wherever they want to be. In theory, they could be going back to France, and we could help set up a residency for them.
So you've reduced the fee to $7,000.
Yeah.
You have created the possibility of a medical school model of creating internships.
Yep.
Great. So tell us more about it.
And then we tweaked the program itself. So one crisis that faces most rabbinical schools is we have text-based learning, right? And in that regard, we're still a conservative rabbinical school. We think rabbis should know how to read Tanakh in the original. They should know how to teach Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash. They should have access to the sources in the original language. And then we hire Israelis to run the Hebrew program, and they teach them how to have a political argument at a cafe in Dizengoff. And there's a gap between the Hebrew that they're learning and the material that they're supposed to be mastering. So we said, let's not do that anymore. Let's come up with a Hebrew program that is aimed at classical Hebrew. And let's have the Hebrew teachers talk to the text teachers and say, you're going to be studying that text. Good. I'll teach them this binyan. I'll teach them this set of vocabulary so that they're ready to roll out the class. And we've seen the success. By year 3, when they're in Israel, I get a call every year from teachers who teach the students of different rabbinical schools all together. And they'll say they were studying a difficult passage in the Mishnah, and they came across an obscure Hebrew practice. And they said, does anyone know what this is? And 2 hands go up, and they're both Ziegler hands. And the Ziegler students know the Hebrew and the Latin term for what that grammar is. And then when asked, where did you learn that? They say, Dr. Wexler, who is an amazing teacher of Bible and rabbinics and now Hebrew. So our Hebrew program is unprecedented, and it's extraordinary. And we see it paying off. We see it in their ability to master text. We see it in their ability to grow in Hebrew. We're going to do.
One second. I just have to turn the light on. I've been basking in your.
I see
on my wound. Is just a minute, please.
Sure.
Okay.
Much better. Much better.
Right.
So we're going to do that with rabbinics too. So here's the thing that's happened over the last couple hundred years. Talmud and Talmudic argumentation became what made you a rabbi. That's true in all the yeshivot in Israel right now and all the Orthodox yeshivot. It was not true in the medieval period. In the medieval period, rabbinics was Talmud, Mishnah, Midrash, Agadita. There's a whole lot of rabbinics bigger than just, is this a refutation? Is this a support? Is this an argument? And we also noticed that rabbis across the country, I can't remember ever hearing a rabbi do that in a sermon. Rabbi Meir is making an argument with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says that. Rabbi Yoshua comes in, but then the sages, and you need to understand this is a refutation because we don't teach that. When we quote the Talmud, it's because we want to help people with a piece of wisdom that will help them thrive better, or a way to understand a Torah perspective on something, right? So what if we taught rabbinics, not so that the study of Talmudic argumentation sucks all the time away and there's nothing left for wisdom? What if we say we're going to teach genres of rabbinic wisdom so that rabbis are able to say to someone, hey, I have a passage from the Mishnah that can help you with what you're struggling with. Let's learn it together. So we're going to completely reinvent rabbinics.
So it's practical rabbinics in a different sense than the way that
practical in a very expansive way. This is, our conviction is that Judaism is a world wisdom tradition, and that it has wisdom to help people thrive. And that's why our people come to us. They don't come to us because they want to be punctilious in following every rule. They come to us because they are convinced that the Torah we will share with them will help them live better lives. So we want to train rabbis in that approach to Torah. And then the
I
final,
wanna-
Michael, if I can say one more thing,
No, go ahead. I'll come back to it.
one more thing. We've been working with the Honey Foundation, which is a wonderful foundation in the
Yes.
United States that works with young Israeli rabbis who are thinking out of the box. So instead of having the idea that rabbinical school, you have to send them to Israel for a year so they learn to love Israel, we noticed that almost all of our rabbinical students have already spent time in Israel. And as rabbis, they will continue to spend time in Israel. They have a firm identity with Israel. So the question is not, can we get them to love Israel? They come with that. The question is, what can they learn in rabbinical school that they can only learn in rabbinical school in Israel? And so there we've come up with a completely new program. It'll be a 2.5-month intensive. And during that time, they will study contemporary Hebrew. They will study Torah and rabbinics that pertains to the land of Israel. There's a whole lot of texts, stories, practices that only pertain to the land of Israel. They'll study those in Israel. And then the final piece is, if you think, where are the people who are asking, how do we mobilize this wisdom tradition for the sake of contemporary Jewish life? The answer is American rabbis and Israeli rabbis. So they should know each other. They should talk to each other. We'll know we've solved the problem when an American rabbi, a Ziegler rabbi, years from now says, I'm trying to make Friday night really meaningful. And I remember there's a rabbi in Omer, and I'm going to call her because she's been thinking about this same issue too. Right? And let's strengthen it as a partnership so that the relationship between American Jews and Israeli Jews is not one of we pay you to be Jewish on our behalf. It's you're struggling with how to keep this tradition relevant and alive. We are too. Let's work as partners. So, okay, that's the elevator speech.
So let me, it's great. And I appreciate it. I want to refer back. I want to start with your conversation about how you're teaching rabbinics. And as luck would have it, Art Green put a piece out, I'm sure you read it, in the Times of Israel. Art Green, who helped found Hebrew College.
Mm-hmm.
And in the article, he takes aim both at a decision that Hebrew College recently made to accept rabbis who are involved in interfaith marriages. And he had what to say about that. But in the article, he also notes that at a time when it is so difficult to attract rabbinical students, the curriculum has changed. And from his perspective, the driving force are the students themselves, which you've answered in your own way. But I just want to read a little bit of what he said and have you react to it if you wouldn't mind. Similar is the case of the Siegel program reduction of its course of study. What right, he's now speaking on behalf of students, does the rabbinical school have to make me learn text in Aramaic, a skill I will never need out there in the pulpit? Yet the congregational rabbi will often be the only deeply committed Jew whom many of his or her congregants know. The rabbi serves as a sort of cultural and spiritual ambassador from the tradition and Jewish history to the contemporary, often mostly indifferent Jewish community. But an ambassador has little to offer if he or she is not rooted deeply in the tradition they are representing. For Jews, as we all know, this means deep learning in the ancient books. It also means living in a richly and fully Jewish home. So how do you respond to Art on this one?
So I saw Rabbi Green's article, his blog on Friday. I have written a response. It should be in the Times by tomorrow. I don't want to touch his criticism of Hebrew College. That's between him and Hebrew College. I wish he had called me and I could have given him our curriculum. It's simply inaccurate. He made an assumption that because we've carved a year off the program, that means we're not teaching text in the original anymore. But that's wrong. We still, I'm willing to line up the amount of credits we have for text courses with the amount of credits that other rabbinical schools to the left of our movement have, and I'm willing to bet we offer more. So we still have an Aramaic intensive. We still teach Talmud in the original. They take text courses every single semester they're in school. We teach halacha, and we have people read from the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah and the Mishnah Torah. I think he's simply articulating a fear, but I do wish that he had given me a phone call first and said, could I see what you're requiring in the new curriculum? Because I could have allayed that fear.
Yeah, though I do wonder, I'm going to put Rabbi Green aside for a moment.
Michael, may I use you as my confessor for a moment?
Please, that would be my great honor.
Okay, Holy Father, so let me just confess to you that when I went to rabbinical school, which was not in the current curriculum and not in the previous curriculum, but in the previous curriculum, so I should be more learned than any living rabbi other perhaps than you. When I was graduating from JTS, I decided I should have a set of Saul Lieberman's Tosefta Kifshuta, which is an all-Hebrew academic commentary on the Tosefta, which, ladies and gentlemen, are the rabbinic texts that didn't make it into the Talmud, but when they got put on the floor in scraps, someone swept them up and published them as a book, because you leave no manuscript unpublished in our tradition. So it's a 7-volume all-Hebrew critical commentary to rabbinic traditions excluded from the Talmud in snippets. And then
I know where this is going.
Yes,
I know where this is going, because I have the same.
It came
on my
with
shelf.
beautiful plastic wrap, it was really amazing. And I put it on the shelf unwrapped, like it was still in the wrapper. And then I moved from my home in Mission Viejo to Los Angeles, and I brought it with me. And then I moved from that home to another home, and I brought it with me. And then when I moved to this home, I said, I'm 60 years old. It's still in the original plastic wrapper. I'm thinking the odds are pretty good I will never read Tosefta Kifshuta. But here's the negative thing that it does. If you walk around thinking to be an authentic rabbi, you have to be a rabbi who's reading Tosefta Kifshuta, then you create a wound in your own self-esteem that you pass on to your congregants. I'm not a good rabbi because I don't read Tosefta Kifshuta. You guys aren't good Jews because you don't even know what Tosefta Kifshuta is.
Yeah.
We bleed that.
I think to build on that, I think that in the JTS of Saul Lieberman, right, it was the goal of rabbinical school was to prepare Talmud scholars.
Yeah.
And the lesser lights were told by Dr. Lieberman, somewhat derisively, not somewhat, very derisively, you'll be a wonderful pulpit rabbi someday.
Correct.
Which was not a compliment.
It was not a compliment.
And so I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
So what if we liberate that? So here's something I do at the Ziegler School that I'm very proud of. The first week during orientation, our new students have dinner with the board. Because I want them to know these lay people are the reason you're able to do what you're doing. And that's true for every successful rabbi at every moment in their career. It's not us trying to persuade them. It's us together building a community that still speaks. So our curriculum admits that. And, and I have talked to other rabbis who are concerned. We're just training rabbis light, right? They won't know as much. When is the last time you know of a rabbi out in the field who published a rigorous scholarly work about a text in an original language? And is that really what you're thinking about when you've got a loved one on their sickbed and the rabbi walks in the room? You want to know, well, when's the last time you published in a scholarly journal, Rabbi? And I'm not putting that down. I love scholarship. I love scholarly articles. But what we're trying to train are people that Maimonides called Rodfei Neshamot, right? They're healers of soul. And that's the goal. So I want to train Ziegler rabbis, and I know JTS wants to train JTS rabbis who can teach in the original. But the goal is not to show some kind of dispassionate mastery. The goal is to help Jews have access to their own spiritual heritage. That's not the same thing.
I'd love to see the curriculum for the text that you're choosing and how they go about that. I think what you're saying makes so much sense because I remember, this is my 40th year, so I get to reminisce a little bit. But I remember the first class that I taught when I came to Anshe back in 1982. It was a class on not Chumash and Rashi, but Parshanut.
Mm-hmm.
And I used it as an opportunity to share all of the biblical knowledge that I had gained at JTS, where we got to talk about the critical theory of Bible study, or which words were in Akkadian. And needless to say, it was not a successful venture.
Yeah.
I actually needed to go back and study Chumash and Rashi because that was skipped in the curriculum.
Right.
Right? There was an assumption that you already know Chumash and Rashi, or Chumash and Rashi isn't worthy of that. And I think that I certainly look at Chumash and Rashi much more than I look at Wright's book on biblical scholarship.
Right.
But
So
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to clarify for everyone that when Michael and I reminisce, it's kind of like looking at the night sky. You're not seeing stars the way they are now. You're seeing the stars the way they were millions of light years ago, because that's how long it took. So JTS has been wrestling with this problem for the last 40 years, and the JTS we remember is not the JTS of today.
Yes.
I want everyone to know that. I want you to just hear that. This is not a criticism of the current place. And JTS is a much more supple and a responsive place than it might have been back in the day.
I want to take a moment and look at the chat and ask some of the questions that are out there. The first question comes from Kevin Miner, and he is asking about Jews by choice. And how can rabbinical schools and synagogues make better use of this demographic? Because we're seeing this, which I think is an interesting question. How many students, how many rabbinical students are Jews by choice in the current classes?
So I can't give you a number, but I can tell you we have been ordaining Jews by choice along with foreign Jews from the start. And they're doing amazing things out in the world. And many of the students we have are themselves people who have non-Jewish parentage, right? Sometimes one, sometimes two. So there is a way in which Judaism in America is broadening and is not simply a reproduction of Ashkenazic ethnicity. And again, you can like that or not like that, but it is the reality. So what I think is important to try to do is embrace the diversity of Jewish life, racially, ethnically, ideologically, religiously. Let's see each other as complementary and as allies, and not try to get everybody to fit a single model.
One more question from the chat, and then we'll come back to them again. This is from Lori Shaw, and she's asking this. With the Pew Report showing such a huge number of young Jews in mixed marriages, can you address the issue of potential rabbinical candidates choosing a rabbinic school to allow them the freedom to marry couples of different religions? Right, so this is the question we touched on and moved off of earlier, but here it is. So I will
let me just
allow Lori to ask you that question.
Great. Let me just translate that into plain English. Here, Rabbi, I have a bomb. I'm going to pull the plug and hand it to you. I'm holding this.
And there you are.
let me say,
But clearly you're talking about this in Siegel, so
I have been giving a lot of thought. What I'm pretty clear on, in a time in which 5% of the Jews are marrying non-Jews, it's possible to retain the policies from ages past. But in this regard, America is now different. American Jews are marrying 70% intermarriage. And let me give you a shocking piece of how that looks.
because that wasn't shocking enough.
No, that wasn't. That's just, everyone knows that from their own
Yes.
nieces, nephews, and children. The thing that Biden and Trump have in common
Yes.
is Jewish grandchildren. There was a charming picture, many of you may have seen it, of the Biden's grandson coming to spend a night at the White House, and he was wearing his Hanukkah PJs, right? And I just thought, if that doesn't summarize where we're at, right? How many of us, when Vice President Harris's husband convenes a panel on anti-Semitism, think, ugh, disgusting. Why would they encourage intermarriage? No, no, no. We're all so proud that the husband of the vice president is one of ours. So I think the really hard conversation for our movement is going to be, what do we do about that? I'm not proposing, I have an idea, but I'm not going to propose what I think we need to do. I think we need to create a space for real conversation in which colleagues are able to share thoughts and fears and ideas, and that everybody, not just rabbis, cantors, lay people, educators, we all have a say and a stake in this. What I will point out is that the conservative movement is uniquely bleeding members, and I think this issue is the #1 reason, right? So we are going to have a decade of conversation as a movement.
I think so. Look, I think that here I'll come back to Art Green. The argument that he made in his blog post was, and this spoke to me as a rabbi, because Anshe has a very robust Jews by Choice program. We convert about 50 people a year in our congregation, which is a lot.
Right.
And the question that Art asked was, well, what's the statement you're making to potential Jews by choice if the rabbi has married someone who hasn't converted themselves? Is that the kind of role model we want in the congregation? That's part of this conversation as well. So I don't want to let this pass by without at least acknowledging what I think is a valid argument. It may not be the argument that wins the day, but because you're alluding to the idea that it's just a matter of time.
I think that is a valid thing for us to talk about and think about, right? I guess I don't want to have the whole evening be about this subject, but I will say again, intermarriage today is not what it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, intermarriage was a Jew saying, I want nothing to do with Judaism or the Jewish community.
True.
That is not why anybody intermarries today. The only reason they intermarried today is they fell in love. And we have to recognize that the challenge here is this is a new phenomenon disguised as an old phenomenon. But intermarriage in the United States today is not what it was at the turn of the century or in Europe. It's just not.
I could not agree with you more. I could not agree with you. And I think that is a very important point to underscore. And it is very complex.
Yes.
Let me move a little bit into in 2 weeks, we're going to be reading Ki Tisa. And Ki Tisa is going to focus on the story of the golden calf of Moses and Aaron. And what I believe is you have two different leadership models there, two rabbinic leadership models there. Aaron is the Rodef Shalom. He is the pursuer of peace. He is the one who is hearing the fear of the people and also nervous about their response to Moses' absence. And so he allows them to do what was unthinkable, to build this golden calf. This is what they needed in this moment. And maybe Aaron is saying, this is what I need to do to save the Jewish people at this time. This is a radical solution, but this is the one that's needed.
Mhm.
Moses, of course, comes down as the lawgiver. And he says the word that Aaron seems to be unable, which is no.
Yeah.
And, Moses, I think we could argue, is taking the long view. And he's willing to stand against the will of the people in order to retain the tradition. So as you think of this classic story in the Torah, and you think about a rabbinical school, which model fits today? Is it Aaron alone? Is it Aaron and Moses? Is it Moses alone? How do you think about it?
So I think accepting that typology, and it's a little more complicated. Moses, after all, is the one who says the daughters of Zelophehad are right. We need to change the rules.
Yes.
So
Okay, but I didn't expect people to read ahead, but okay.
yeah, sorry. Warning. But I think the job of a rabbinical school, any rabbinical school, is not to weigh in on that. Like, our job is to take anyone who's willing to immerse themselves in Torah and lead the Jewish people, and to recognize we need Aaron's and we need Moses's. And so what we want to do is we want to train them in all the skills they need, and then let them go out in the world and surprise us by doing things we would never have expected, right? Because you and I can both think of colleagues who are, in your paradigm, more Aaron-like and more Moses-like, and have all made real contributions. So I try not to tell students how they should come out on a particular issue or a particular subject. I try to feed them the wealth of Jewish wisdom around it, and then trust that they will find a way that works for them, right? And I don't have to weigh in on that. In fact, I have to not.
Well,
Push, go ahead.
I'm not sure that I'm in total agreement. In other words, I'm not sure that you want to say it's either or, but I do think it's either and or. I think that rabbis will not succeed if they don't have the Aaron approach today. But I don't think rabbis will be able to be perceived as authentic if they're not willing to have no in their vocabulary at times. And as the example that you offered, the Benot Zelophehad, shows that Moses is willing to take a breath and think for a moment, and to think, well, how does the Torah actually speak in this moment, without simply saying no? I think there has to be a balance there.
Correct. So look, there has to be in each individual rabbi a coherence and an authenticity that comes from who they are and their own distillation of the tradition. But there's no virtue in saying yes just to say yes, and there's no virtue in saying no just to say no. The question is, can you, in the integrity of who you are, help others shine a light on their own integrity? And to do that, we'll all have places where I personally have a limit. I can't cross that line. And sometimes my limit will allow me to say, but Rabbi so-and-so can help you with that. And sometimes the limit will be such that I'll say, I'm not going to refer you to someone for that either. And different rabbis will have their lines in different places. But I think what we have to have in common, and here's where you and I and the conservative movement still stand, it has to come out of a place of deep learning, in which the tradition and the traditional texts speak through us. It has to come out of a place of personal practice, meaning we have to love God, love mitzvot, love Jewish life, and walk that walk in the way we move in the world. And then I would add a third thing. We tell Ziegler students they have to love Jews no less than they love Judaism. Because I think there are an awful lot of rabbinic spokespeople out there who have disdain for actual Jews, but claim to love Judaism. And you can't. You can't. God chose the Jewish people. And so I think cultivating rabbis who love actual Jews in all of their diversity and imperfection, and at the same time model a life of Torah integrity, that is essential. I don't think so. So one thing, by the way, that we've resisted, where I've said no, we will never be an online school. I don't think you can learn how to be a spiritual mentor and pastor on a screen. I think that it's all about relationship, and the only way you learn about relationship is by being in it.
I would add, first of all, I agree with you 100%. And I think this love of Jews and the Jewish people, being Ohev Yisrael, as many Abrams noted, is vital. You can't be a rabbi, just a congregational rabbi, without that. But I think that a rodef in our day and age has a broader meaning. And what I mean by that is we have to be willing to go outside of our institutions, of our buildings, and pursue people.
Yep.
And that often means that we are pursuing people on their terms,
yes,
in ways to do outreach. I'm wondering, is there part of your program that touches on outreach and how to think about outreach?
Sure. So look, the challenge is, as you've said, you have to meet people where they're at. And you have to respect them where they're at. And then the ones who are willing to grow with you, you then take them from where they're at to where they're willing to go, using Jewish tradition as a way for that kind of spiritual discipline and practice and growth. So absolutely, our students all work with congregations or communities where they're out in the world and not just sitting inside a sanctuary waiting for people to come in. And that, I think, is their native language. Right? In other words, for some of us older folk, we're used to the idea that we build a building, we schedule an adult ed class, and then we tell people what's wrong there. Why are you not showing up? Right?
I think after COVID, no one thinks that way anymore.
Yeah, that's great. So the challenge is then, how do we help encourage that malleability and that going to where people are at? I love when I go onto Facebook and I see that a former student is sitting in a coffee shop and has a talk to the rabbi table a couple times a week, right? Or is spending time out in the world meeting people. I think that kind of affirmative embrace, finding people and offering ourselves to them, is crucial.
I want to talk about Israel for a few minutes with you, and then I'm going to turn my attention to the questions that are in the chat.
Great.
So hopefully you can go a little bit past our hour. I'm hoping in advance.
Sure.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So you talked about rethinking a year of study in Israel. And you talked about creating a connection with rabbis in Israel and deepening that connection, etc. I wonder about the experience of spending a year in Israel as a rabbinical student and losing the value of that. Let me say this. When I was in rabbinical school, I was putting myself through school. And so if I would have had the choice to not go to Israel for the year, I would not have gone for the year. It would have made more sense for me financially. But that was probably the single most important year of my rabbinical school education. Yeah. And I learned about Israel. I taught a Mizrahi, I tutored a Mizrahi kid. I learned about Israel from the inside, but I was thinking about it not just as a Jew, but as a potential rabbi.
Sure.
I am a little concerned about that, I have to say. And I'm just wondering about the thinking that goes into that.
So I share your concern. And what I'll say is two things. One is every curriculum is provisional. So if we find that we're not able to give people that strong and living sense of Israel at the heart of their own Jewish identity, we'll revisit it. but we need to launch this program, so we're going to try this, and we'll see if it works. But I worry about that too. We expect every Ziegler rabbi to recognize and embrace that Israel is an important part of their own Jewish identity. And there are many ways to love Israel and many ways to identify as an Israelite. But we need them to be somewhere in that family of associations, right? So whether your politics is more Netanyahu politics or more J Street politics, I don't care, and it's not my job to weigh in on that. My job is to make sure that your rabbinical training helps to strengthen your love of Israel and your engagement with Israel as a personal expression.
So would you, if a person was applying to rabbinical school and proclaim themselves to be an anti-Zionist, who has no interest in Zionism whatsoever, or a non-Zionist, and just say, I have no interest in this, I'm a diaspora Jew, I have no interest. How would you think about that, especially at the time when this person could have all of the talents and skills that you're looking for? But does Ziegler have a responsibility to help create rabbis who are engaged in the conversation as Zionists?
So I'm going to give an answer that will annoy everybody because I'm not going to say anything that everyone agrees with. I think it's crucial that one is an Ohev Yisrael, and here a lover of Israel. But I want to say that's deeper than politics. So if I could use an analogy, I'm a very patriotic American, and I hate many of the aspects of my country's history. And I disagree with many of the policies of any government. But my love of America is not based on political policy. It's based on something deeper. It's the dream of what America can and should be in the world. And that's my identity with Israel too. Whether I like some of the policies of this government or the last government, whatever, it's deeper than who's in the government. And I need my students to have that too. But now I want to say something that will sound a bit heretical to some of you. One can be a lover of Israel and not be a Zionist. Zionism is a modern political movement. It's a movement that says that the Jews having national self-autonomy and the ability to govern themselves in their own land is a key, essential part of Jewish survival. I think that's true. But can you love Israel and think that Israel is in your blood and in your soul and not be a political Zionist? You can. I know such people. I've had a handful, not many, maybe 2 rabbinical students in the course of my 20-some odd years who are just not supporters of nationalism. They think that nationalism divides people. They think it militarizes people. They're opposed to it. They're not more opposed to Jewish nationalism than they are opposed to anyone else's nationalism. They just don't like nationalism. But they also go to Israel. They also have Israeli family. They also spent time there. So to me, non-Zionist of that kind is very different than anti-Zionist, right? And I would not admit an anti-Zionist, someone who says, my Judaism is opposed to the idea of there being a Jewish sovereignty in our homeland. And I think that it is detrimental to Jewish life and I want to dismantle it. That person will have to find a different rabbinical school.
You'll have to help me a little bit more with, I understand the concept of a person who is anti-nationalism. I mean, Albert Einstein, for that matter, was one of those people. But does that person also accept the notion of a Jewish homeland beyond, in the Herzl's understanding of having a nation state? That's the question.
Right. And there I want to draw on the richness of Zionist thought itself. The idea that Zionism is just about a government and an army is one kind of Zionism. There's also Achad Ha'am Zionism, right? There's Martin Buber Zionism. I want our people to, and let me just say, this is in my whole time, there's been one, maybe two such students. Most of my students would call themselves Zionist as an affirmation, and they range from center left to center right in their political ways of expressing that. And so our job is to help foster that. But that's different for me. The shortest answer to your question is someone who is an anti-Zionist, and I would talk to them about what does that mean. Generally, I don't have to tell them we won't take you, because once they hear about the school and its program, they realize it's too immersed in Zionism for them to be able to be happy.
This obviously is a topic that you think quite a bit about, and it's something that we think quite a bit about. We just had a session with Resetting the Table, and we work very hard at creating an open conversation within the congregation on Israel.
Right.
But this is only going to become, I think, more and more charged. And I think young rabbis, having interviewed rabbinical students, senior rabbinical students, just recently about this, I can say that I think that there is a responsibility on behalf of the rabbinical schools to help students, and this is something that I certainly would do if we had the opportunity, is to think deeply about this issue and beyond the conversation amongst young rabbis, how to think about it in congregational terms.
Absolutely. And part of what I expect will happen is that as they do work in synagogues, that will be part of what they'll learn. They'll see the way it matters in our congregations, and they'll have a chance to think, but they also will do that in their classes. When we study modern Jewish history, when they study Zionist thought, they're exposed to all of the ways that our identity has been profoundly shifted. I've told my students this, it's trivial, but it also means something. When I was a young Jew growing up, the symbol of Judaism was lox and bagels, and the center of my family's Judaism was Brooklyn. And then at some point, pomegranates appeared on all of our Jewish artwork, right? And that reality, it's not Brooklyn anymore. I love Brooklyn. It's not a criticism of Brooklyn. It's that the center is now Zion. And that's going to be true, and I think is a positive development in the unfolding of Jewish civilization. So you're right. Rabbis are going to be in their work will be to help explain that, translate that, and give people an inner feel for that.
Listen, it could have been shawarma, so I think we're doing fine with pomegranates.
Yes.
I want to take a moment before we get. I have one more question I want to just throw. I have lots of questions I'd like to ask, but I want you to make a distinction between the ordinee graduating this year from Siegel and the ordinee that will be the recipient of this new curriculum. What do you think will be different about them?
Well, look, part of our hope is that there will be more of them. Right? Our desire is not simply to cannibalize a larger fraction of the pie. It's to get people who thought, gee, I didn't see a way to go to rabbinical school, but now I realize it's 3 years. The tuition is much more limited. I won't have the same debt, and I can do that and then do my residency somewhere, so I could go to rabbinical school too. That's my hope. I hope that those graduating in the new curriculum will have a more integrated approach to Hebrew language and Jewish text study. I hope that they'll have a keen sense of rabbis as professionals who serve and a sense of service.
Mhm.
And I hope they'll have a sense that Judaism is rooted in relationship. In that sense, it'll be continuous with the Ziegler graduates of today, but I'm hoping that we'll continue to polish and improve the way we deliver it so that there's a new energy and a new dynamism. We're also moving off the hill in Bel Air. I should have mentioned that too. We're moving into the heart of Pico Robertson, so students at Ziegler won't have to commute on a freeway anymore.
Well, it's such a beautiful campus. It's a loss.
It is a beautiful
It
campus.
really is a loss.
It's a loss.
In some ways, and I think it's a real opportunity at the same
That's right.
time.
And it's both of those at the same time.
Let me turn to a couple of the questions that are in the chat, if that's okay.
Sure.
Brian Nagorski asks, I'm going to pair this question. He's saying, should there be two levels of study, as in a core curriculum for 2 years that train rabbis for the pulpit, and a rabbi as an educator or an academic with different programs that may have more intensive study?
So here's the challenge that we thought about that. We talked about that both with the Blue Ribbon and with our faculty. Students come to the rabbinical school for their first interview, and I ask them, how do you see yourself as a rabbi? And they say whatever they think. And then I ask them at the beginning of their senior year what kind of rabbi they want to be. There's a random relationship between their answer then and their answer when they started. And then when I look at what job they took, there's a random relationship between that and what they said those previous 2 times. Rabbis of Michael's venerable stage of life tended to have a single career trajectory, which they pursued throughout their life. That is not true of younger rabbis anymore. So a rabbi who is ordained has to be able to function as an educator, then function in a pulpit, then have a chance to manage a creative agency. We have to be able to train them so that they can move everywhere they need to move as a rabbi. So I don't think we have the ability to have a track so rigid that you just give this to one and that to another. I also think it's very risky if you want to start telling me who are the rabbis who don't need to know so much. Because I can tell you, having worked as a chaplain, you go up to someone's bedside and they say, hey, listen, I've been wanting to ask a rabbi this for the longest time. And then they come up with a question of Jewish law that unless you were trained in it, you wouldn't, and you can't say to them, I'll come back in a week. They may not still be in that hospital bed in a week. They'll have gone home, God willing, right? So you have to be able to answer their question. And rabbi educators walking through the campus, some grandparent or mom is going to come up and say, hey, I got you. I need to ask you a question. And you don't know, that question could be Jewish history, Zionist thought, ritual practice, myth. I mean, it can be, you have to know. So the idea that we train some rabbis at this level of depth and some rabbis at that level of depth, I think is a misunderstanding of the way rabbis go from type of rabbi to type of rabbi. And it's also a misunderstanding of what people expect from the title rabbi.
I know at Anshe Emet, we are very interested, and this goes back to something you said earlier, that in a way, when we get our first pulpit, we start to learn how to be rabbis. But I think I had the privilege of being mentored by Rabbi Seymour Cohen, who was a scholar in his own right.
Yep.
And he asked me a question every time I talked to him that is so ingrained in me. He would say, the first thing he would say is, what are you reading?
Mm-hmm.
What are you studying? And one of the things that we work at Anshe Emet is this continual study, right? Chavuta, and growing as rabbis, growing with text, and engaging. So the fact that you are, you're not the finished product when you start the pulpit, you are ready to learn how to be a rabbi in a congregational setting.
That's right.
And so we shouldn't lose that idea. I'm going to ask one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's I'm going to riff off of Amy Karp's question. Because one of the real challenges, and this is something that I want to speak just about the view of the world from a place like Anshe, Emet, is that during COVID, we were able to pivot. And we could put a whole lot of money into technology and begin to stream and to run not only service, but every program in a hybrid way. So we didn't really lose a step, we actually gained a step. But lots and lots of congregations out there couldn't do that. So I think a lot as a rabbi about what is our responsibility, the responsibility of a congregation like Anshe, Emet, to smaller congregations within a 90-mile radius. How can we be helpful to them? Because those congregations are not going to get these rabbis. They're just not, that's not going to happen. Right. And I do appreciate the fact that many of them are going to close in the next few years or combine with other congregations. But have you thought about, para-rabbis and thinking about how we can train people to work with congregations and maybe not be an ordained rabbi, but can help serve a smaller community? Some sort of internships.
I need to back up in answering that, in responding to that. There was a lot in there that's so rich. We could honestly have an hour just on that. What I will say is, you have inspired me along those lines, because I've seen the way you have reached out to colleagues who weren't going to benefit Anshe Emet directly, but they would help create a rich additional resource for Chicago Jewry.
Yes.
And I do think that there's a role to be played both by the rabbinical schools and movement leaders and by the leadership of the larger congregations to see their job as not only within the walls of their institution, but what kinds of partnership could be created that strengthen some of the weaker institutions that need a boost, that are doing valuable work, but they can't monetize it on their own, right? So how do we create that approach? For years, I've been talking to the Rabbinical Assembly in the United Synagogue about creating a fund to pay rabbinical students from JTS and Siegel to go out once or twice a month to work in communities that can't afford them. And that, we would create some kind of credit granting for it, for that as their internship. And the RA and United Synagogue and the individual community would together come up with a stipend that would make it affordable for them to do that rather than other work. And maybe you have them 2 weekends of every month going out into the world and being shluchim. Right?
As our Chabad brothers and sisters would say.
Because they understand, they get that, right? So I think we still need to do a better job of that. I think that there's got to be a way in which, if we are an actual movement, we are taking care of the institutions who are part of our ecosystem. And you've done that so many times that this can't be a surprise to Anshe Emet, but it is news out in the world, and it needs to be something we build on.
Well, Rabbi Artson, I am so grateful to you and honored, and this has been such an important conversation. I look forward to continuing the conversation, but I wish you Hatzlacha and all of our friends at Siegel. Our congregation has benefited greatly from rabbis who have come from Siegel, just as we have rabbis who have come from JTS. But the work that you're doing is really avodat kodesh. And I look forward to, I hope we'll be on your short list of rabbis who are looking for internships, because we would be very interested in engaging that process.
They couldn't be in a better place. And Michael, I want to bless you. You are and have been such a source of light, not only for your congregants who love you, but for all of us who love you. And so to you and to Anshe Emet, thank you for providing a model of a really wonderful community. And thank you for being a platform for this beloved rabbi so that he's been able to make such important contributions for all of us.
Well, thank you. Toda Rabba. And Amy Karp, thank you very much for putting all of this together. Good evening, everyone. Laila Tov. Thank you.